Started. Yes, this is being recorded. Hoping to post this on HLC's website afterwards, so you can all have it for posterity. By clicking got it, you're consenting to be recorded. So thanks, everyone. Well, I think I will go ahead and try to get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Please let me know if you can see. Do you see stuff? Awesome. Okay, thanks. Visual feedback is good. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Elaine Wong. I am a board member of Housing Leadership Council, San Mateo County, and an architect at Van Meter Williams Pollock, you can see. So kind of wearing two hats today, but really excited to be here. I'm a housing advocate and an architect, and I just want to share my appreciation for everyone, all the attendees, the sponsors, the housing supporters who've made Affordable Housing Month, the month of May, and this event possible. I think, as you all know, more than ever, we really need to respond to the housing shortage and make San Mateo County, which HLC represents, more equitable and affordable place for everyone. If you aren't a member of HLC, we would definitely encourage that you become one, and please consider joining HLC SMC. So it's hlcsmc.org, and maybe give for those who can't be a member. If you have any questions during the event or issues with the Zoom, feel free to drop them in the chat. Or raise your hand, and an HLC staff member will assist you. And I think at the end, we're going to save some time for Q&A. I think it would be great if you have a question to please put it in the chat. I think that's the preferred format, and we'll go through them in the order that we receive them and try to have our panelists answer them as best as we can. So Vivian or Fernanda, anything else from a logistics standpoint that we should highlight before I start?
You're all set. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to get started. Welcome to Mythbusting Affordable Housing Costs, Part 2. We first presented this topic at a Housing Leadership Day in 2019 BC, before COVID. 3 years later, and one pandemic later, the need for affordable housing has increased, but the cost challenges never disappeared. And in some ways, they kind of got worse. So we wanted to kind of revisit this topic and see what's changed and what can be done now. Since creating affordable housing is a huge team sport, it takes a huge village of different people and parties to realize. So for today's presentation, we wanted to assemble a variety of perspectives. So you'll hear from the legislative perspective, you'll hear from an architect, and you'll hear from a developer, just to kind of get a little well-rounded perspective. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our three esteemed panelists. We have Marc Berman. Assemblymember Marc Berman is our legislative voice, and he is currently representing District 24, which spans most of San Mateo County and part of Santa Clara County. It goes all the way from Half Moon Bay down to Menlo Park and all the way to Sunnyvale. And I think we have a lot of your constituents on this call, myself included, and Kelly. So thank you, Marc, for joining. We also have Rick Williams. He is a founding partner of VMWP. He's the W in the VMWP. He's an architect and urban designer, and VMWP is now in its 33rd or 34th year. And the practice is focused primarily on affordable housing and planning communities and neighborhoods. Rick is a wonderful architect, but he also leads VMWP's urban design practice. So likely his work has helped foster the frameworks for a lot of affordable housing, not just the buildings themselves, but the sort of guiding principles, plans, specific plans to shape a lot of the communities and buildings all over the Bay Area. But we also have offices now in Denver and Minneapolis, and that's very exciting that we've been able to expand our reach so far. And then finally, last but not least, most importantly, really, Kelly Hollywood is a senior project manager from Mercy Housing, and she's going to provide the developer perspective. She's currently leading a number of projects for Mercy, and actually has been working very closely with a couple of counties in our region, including San Mateo County, and Santa Clara County, and looking forward to bringing more projects to fruition. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to kind of let the three presenters present. I'll have a couple questions for them, and then we'll open it up to a broader Q&A. So I'm going to hand this off to you, Mark, and let you go for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Elaine, and thanks to HLC for organizing this and all the other kind of conversations that have been happening over the past week. And really appreciate the chance to just come and chat with folks about housing and some of the myths that I've seen. I served on the Palo Alto City Council for 4 years, from 2012 to 2016, and then I've served in the state assembly since 2016. And I really became passionate about housing during my time on the Palo Alto City Council. And some of you might remember, but there was a affordable housing project that the City Council had unanimously approved called Maybell. And some neighbors it was going to be 60 units of senior affordable housing and then 12 market rate townhouses to help kind of pay for some of the affordable housing. And neighbors of the project put a referendum on the ballot, and the community, the city voters, overturned the project and actually, essentially killed it. And that is now, what was going to be 60 units of senior affordable housing and 12 market rate townhouses is now, I think, 12 or maybe 15, like $5 million and up single family homes. And that made me realize how contentious this issue was. And over the next few years while I was on the council, I started to try to bring people together from the community that I saw were really passionate about housing, but didn't necessarily know each other. And I might talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But I first off, absolutely want to talk about the myths that I've seen. And the first myth that I want to talk about is the myth that affordable housing impact fees will lead to more affordable housing. And this isn't always the case. And affordable housing impact fees can actually sometimes be a barrier to building affordable housing and building just market rate housing. So as a lot of you probably know, to alleviate the state's housing crisis, it's essential that we increase the supply of affordable housing. And one of the principal tools we have to do this is our state density bonus law. In return for including affordable units in a housing development, market rate developers are given an increase in density. The increase in density through density bonus units is intended to financially support the inclusion of the affordable units. However, some jurisdictions impose affordable housing impact fees on density bonus units. They argue that they need to impose these affordable housing impact fees on density bonus units so that they can then go and build more affordable housing. But the reality is that this undermines the purpose of density bonus law and can often make the housing development no longer economically feasible, and as a result, can prevent affordable housing and market rate housing from actually getting built. So by assessing the affordable housing impact fee on density bonus units, communities, jurisdictions are stopping housing from being built, and they're not generating any fees. So it's kind of the worst of all worlds. And this is why I believe that prohibiting local jurisdictions from imposing this specific fee on density bonus units would remove an existing barrier to building more affordable housing. And given the severity of the housing crisis, we need to use every tool in our toolbox to create housing that so many Californians desperately need. Now, the second myth that I want to briefly cover is the myth that there are no barriers to affordable housing after a project is built. Barriers are always discussed on the front end, but rarely do we think about barriers to affordable housing that exist on the back end after the housing is already built. And this is the focus of my legislation this year, AB 2006, which would streamline the oversight of affordable housing. As some of you may know, when an affordable housing development receives financing from the state, the project enters into a regulatory agreement with the state entity, and the entity monitors the development to ensure compliance with affordability, maintenance, financial, and other requirements. Currently, three state entities provide compliance monitoring. And those are the Department of Housing and Community Development, the California Housing and Finance Agency, and the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee. The problem is that affordable housing developments frequently receive financing from more than one state entity, leading to multiple state entities providing overlapping compliance monitoring and creating duplicative and unnecessary work. For example, housing providers can be required to report up to 3 different state entities, often at the same time, usually in different formats, on everything from the physical state of their units to their operating budgets. The legislature has been working for years to accelerate production and increase the efficiency of the affordable housing finance system, and it's time to also streamline the state's oversight system once these units are built. With the ongoing housing crisis, California needs to spend more time building affordable housing and less time and money on paperwork. To remove this barrier, AB 2006 would direct the 3 state entities to coordinate their compliance monitoring and eliminate duplicative work. Specifically, my bill would, by January 1st, 2024, direct these entities to enter into an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, to require only one state entity conducts physical inspections for a project, eliminate the submittal of duplicate information, and provide a single process to obtain required approvals. This common sense bill would help eliminate unnecessary work and focus resources where they should be, which is on providing safe, affordable housing for California residents. So those are the 2 myths that I wanted to go over, and look forward to any Q&A that folks have in a little bit.
Thank you, Mark. I think we'll turn this over next to Rick Williams and have you kind of go through your myth and your points. Go
Great.
ahead.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, everybody. Really excited to be here. I can tell you, while it's been a tough 3 years since our last talk for everybody, affordable housing and the environment around getting affordable housing built, approved and built, is actually better than it was 3 years ago. And I was pretty optimistic then as well. But one of the myths of affordable housing that I hear at community meetings all the time is surrounding residents are really concerned that affordable housing, it must be lower quality because it has to be built cheaper than market rate housing. And in fact, that nothing could be further from the truth. Most of our clients hold on to their properties for 50+ years. So they're actually more concerned about the construction of the housing, and it goes through more scrutiny than most other developments. And market rate housing, particularly for sale, they build it and then the developer sells it, and then they're out of the picture. So they're less concerned after the project's built than an owner who's going to hold on to the building for 50 years. The other thing we hear a lot is a complaint that, ironically, that it's also too expensive. And why is it more expensive than market rate housing? And in some ways, it is more expensive unless you consider what most people are now discussing about affordable housing is that it's really a community benefit. And a lot of people realize that we're placing a lot of values and ambitions onto our affordable housing developments, whether they're highly sustainable, they're a public works project, so we're paying prevailing wage to the construction industry. The community gets greater scrutiny of it because they're donating or providing money and funds for it. So there's a sense of ownership, thus a sense of control. And that is changing quickly. But the housing also provides greater services than a market rate development to the residents. They support their residents so that the residents can be successful in life. And they develop a true relationship with their housing development. There's a couple of other things we do that affordable housing does. It oftentimes gets the leftover bottom of the barrel sites that they have to deal with. The remnant sites from a freeway over interchange modification to a old industrial site, to a leftover site from the rest of a development that never got finished. So we get challenging sites which have infrastructure costs, so we're often having to mend the communities. And we're mending the community through the development. And then parking and the cost of parking is now being dealt with much of the new legislation. So we appreciate our legislators to realize that. And at the end, I'll give you a little thumbnail on the cost of construction 101 and where the money goes in a project from the construction standpoint. Next. I'll just mention that affordable housing has really been a leader in sustainability. Before there was LEED and before there was Greenpoint rated, the state tax credit system, the funding, one of the major funding sources, was using affordable housing as a model for sustainable development. And they tied funding to exceeding Title 24, which led to issues such as net zero, low carbon, and all electric buildings, as well as stormwater management and indoor air quality and other features that you now see regularly in housing. Really was led by affordable housing 15 and 20 years ago. Next. I want to mention the sense of ownership, which is drastically changing with the new legislation in the state and SB 35 and other legislation that's occurred. For many, many years, there was a sense of ownership with the communities that they thought that they could dictate both the type of affordable housing, often wanting family housing or wanting senior housing and not family housing, which created workforce housing issues, or wanting a particular style, which some communities still do, or they really wanted to add a mixed use development with retail and other uses, though there wasn't any funding source to pay for those. So a lot of the goals of a community were placed on affordable housing projects that weren't placed on other market rate projects. And also what we found is that affordable housing projects are often a catalyst to new development areas or new plans, whether they're along the El Camino Real or the San Pablo Avenue Boulevard. But the whole idea of creating a new plan and seeing affordable housing developed, often at the beginning, after a plan is approved, the first projects out the chute have to conform to a greater extent and in a more pure form to the plans than later projects do. And those are often the affordable housing developments. And so they get an additional burden of the plan expectations early on a project. Next, please. I'll mention greater scrutiny, and this is a project close to my heart and in my backyard. And it's out of San Mateo County, so I'm safe in talking with this group, maybe. And just as an example, this is the Whistle Stop development and two nonprofits coming together to develop a senior community center and a service center and affordable housing. I started on this project, and we started on this project in 2014. We had the initial construction budget of about $15 million. And as of this last month, it just broke ground. So we've been working on it now for some 7 and 8 years. And what we now have with a slightly larger project is a $32 million project. So it's literally doubled in cost in the time it got to go from vision through entitlements to permitting and to start construction. And so time is money, and that is where the greater scrutiny really impacts the cost of affordable housing. Next, please. And I'm going to make a couple people unhappy now by mentioning that while we do get public funding for developments, and I have to say that I hold deep respect to anyone that can build some of the major complex buildings that are being developed today for affordable housing. We have to be able to understand that prevailing wage, which is a good thing, which creates good jobs and good paying jobs, also costs more than the market rate development community is often having to pay to build their developments. So while some cities are requiring union or prevailing wage on all of their housing in their community to the extent that they can, it does cost more. And what we really need is for the unions and the companies that are paying these prevailing wages to get more employees, to train more people, to really focus on maximizing the value on the construction end, and try to bring more people into the construction industry in the future, because there is a definite shortage, and that should help with the cost of construction. So I'm an advocate for the contractors, but I also would like them to bring in as many new workers as they can to the field for those high-paying jobs. Next. I mentioned services. This is a real difference between an affordable housing development and a market rate development. We're not only creating more spaces in the building, which costs money for the services, but the services are programs provided, after school programs, events, services to help with education, services that help with just basic banking and business opportunities for residents, so that they really are supported, so that they're successful in their lives beyond just having housing, which is really a foundation for their success, not the finishing of it. Next. I mentioned Remnant Sites. These are always wonderful sites. Love them. They're always triangular. They're never square. They're never flat. We find historic buildings on them that we couldn't actually see when we first went out to view the site. And while the communities can be very supportive, these remnant sites often come with a lot of additional costs associated that are built into the sites. They're near freeways, they're near railroad tracks, they're too small, they're triangular, they're in an industrial area, they don't have the utilities that they need, or, as is mostly the case, they don't have any of those things, or they have all of those things. So we're trying to really mend a community back, put it back together from these remnant sites. And they're a challenge, they're fun to deal with, but they do add costs to a development. Next. Everybody knows that parking is a huge cost for any of the developments. And I just wanted to say that it's gotten worse over the last 3 years. When I changed these numbers, I was a little astounded myself. We were looking at $50,000 a parking space, and now we're up at around $70,000 a parking space. And subgrade parking could be $80,000 a parking space. So there's lots of different ways that we're trying to challenge that. At least the legislation and the density bonus programs and being near transit have helped with the parking costs. And we have to continue to push that envelope. But one of the things that we're doing with affordable housing is also trying to reduce the cost of housing overall, and parking at $70,000 a space is a major factor in it. It can be 10 to 15% of the cost of a unit. So that is really critical. And I'll just say that density is important. It does create additional cost when we have to go to a podium parking to provide the parking for the residents. So somewhere in the range, when the property values are $4 million an acre, that's when the podiums really start to make sense. It doesn't make sense when it's a lower cost. In San Mateo County, $4 million sounds like a deal. But if you're up in Sonoma County and building, the costs are the same, but the rents, even for affordable rents, are much lower. And so they have a much more difficult time trying to achieve the densities that you might be able to achieve in San Mateo and in other areas. So that's why we're always trying to reduce the number of parking spaces that we need as part of a development while having enough for the residents. Next. My construction cost 101 here, I just want to mention that 3 key pieces to this. There is really a jump in construction cost when you go from 3 and 4 story buildings, which are a particular construction type, to the higher construction costs for the 5 to 7 story buildings, which are much more prevalent now in the South Bay with the changing of the codes in the last 5 or 6 years. So the higher construction costs are being found in buildings of 5 to 7 stories, and the cost per square foot goes up $25 to $50 a square foot, depending on the mix and scale of the various development. So if you factor that into the parking, and then you factor parking costs into that, those are the 2 major driving forces. But once a lot of people think just you can make it taller, but at a certain point, it doesn't pay off to have it be taller unless you can go a lot taller. And that's kind of one of the myths that many people have. Just give them a little bit more height and it makes it cheaper, or makes it easier to provide more housing, but it also is much more costly as you get taller. Next, please. So where does the money go in the construction? I just wanted to highlight a couple of areas. The site itself probably costs about 5% just to get the site prepped and the utility and all of that piece to it. The site development is usually another 10%, particularly when it's site parked. It could be up to 15 to 20%, depending on the amount of parking that you have to provide on the site. And then, while everybody doesn't like to admit it, prevailing wages does add approximately 15% to a construction project. And in that realm, a cost premium on a $120 million project could be $19 to $20 million. So it is real money, and it costs a real, it is a real item, a premium for those good paying jobs that we all want to see. And then the cost per unit has been varying depending on whether you're creating subgrade parking, above grade parking, and what the densities are. But we're seeing numbers anywhere from $450,000 to $650,000 per unit. And one of the issues, if you think that Joe Biden has a problem with inflation, he's had to deal with it now for maybe 6 months to a year. We've been seeing 5% plus increase year over year for almost the last 10 years. So a project has basically gone up over 50% in the last 10 years, even if it's just the same project you're building. So we've been dealing with construction inflation for many, 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 many years now. Next, please. So in closing, I just wanted to note that affordable housing is a community benefit. And I think one of the things that is really, I've heard, is that people really feel that way now. And you're hearing that at each and every community meeting that you go to. And so you all have done a great job in sending that message to your community decision makers. And in regards to that, they've been a good leader in sustainability and providing services, responding well to a community scrutiny, providing additional good paying jobs, mending the community, and dealing with all of these construction costs, which have been escalating, and finding the funding to do that. And if we didn't have really great developers, such as Mercy Housing and others that really are committed to doing this, we would have an even greater housing problem. And so I'm going to let the person who really helps solve all of these construction cost issues by collecting all this money. Thanks.
Thanks, Rick. Oh, there's some recent projects, and take it away, Kelly. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you both for setting that stage for this important conversation. And thank you, Elaine, for the introduction. I work with Mercy Housing, as Elaine explained, and we put a lot of the policies and framework together to create affordable housing in our communities. So next slide, please. We're going to go through some common affordable housing regulations and some varied items that drive development and operation costs so high. So the first myth we're going to discuss is affordable housing developers get kickback special permission, and it's easier rules to build. Next slide, please. So while initially affordable housing developers may seem to be given a leg up with free or discounted land from local or private partners, waived or reduced fees from a locality, we often, we try to use streamlined entitlements approvals such as SB 35, and we luckily get local public investment and subsidy to operate our developments. Next slide. But that's not entirely the full picture. So typically some of these initial items, such as waived local fees or land provided at a reduced cost, really help to propel a development forward and make a development project feasible. However, they're not always what makes it entirely successful. So typically, along with some of those initial kickbacks or program, incentives, come extensive requirements and regulations for what we as an affordable housing developer have to do. And some of that is scrutinized design review, increased accessibility requirements, extreme funding restrictions, impact fees that we are required to do, extensive infrastructure and neighborhood improvements, bringing in new utilities, and reaching local sustainability reach codes that are often put on the developer, such as all electric buildings, like that. So we are obligated to meet the goals of the locality, a landowner, or a funding source. And these could restrict our program of the building. It could restrict the unit count. It could restrict the income levels and the rental income that we are allowed to receive as a developer. It dictates the design requirements, the green features of a building. Like Rick explained it dictates the hiring requirements, and often really goes down to the tenant population and the long-term service requirements that we are required to fulfill within a development. So all of this is set by funders and our local jurisdiction, and we must meet the strict regulations to build the housing in that community. The second thing related to this is impact fees. And while as a affordable housing developer, we can frequently be eligible for reduced fees to some of the regulations that we are keeping the AMI levels of the housing under, that might be reduced fees on building plan and design review, but we often still have to pay for staff time or outside review to propel a project forward quickly. We're still obligated to contribute to significant impact fees, school district fees, public works fees, fire department fees, water service, bringing new utilities to a development that maybe has never had utilities before, bringing in new water or fire department services that have never been served in this area. And that can, all of these combined together can really add several millions of dollars to a project development. One thing that Rick was touching on is that we also, as a developer, are really at the forefront of local environmental reach codes. And that is really implemented from a locality, the state, and a lot of our funding sources. In order for us to be competitive with funding, we have to go above and beyond the local codes and environmental codes to get that funding and be successful. So really, we are at the forefront of that building and design, and building, for energy innovation. We're trying to reduce environmental impact. We're solving for extensive community needs, increasing parking or decreasing parking if it's what's needed in the community. We are trying to create a sense of placemaking and design in these communities that we're building in a sense that's extremely durable and lasts for the extent that we own a development for, which can be 40, 50, 60 years in the lifespan of a development. And this often comes at the cost of our engineering and design teams to find new solutions. So we're constantly trying to push them to create the building more efficient, do it more economically, and have more long-term benefit to our developments. Okay, next slide, please. So the next thing we're going to discuss is related to more of the building and construction. So I think we've heard that affordable developers build cheap because they make all their money off the buildings. And that's definitely not entirely true. Next slide, please. So affordable developers, we really don't just build housing. I think Rick was trying to illustrate, we often create more than just housing. We are really going into communities that have typically been underserved. And we are trying to really create stable, healthy environments for communities in the long term. So we, as affordable developers, have to contribute to the infrastructure. We do extensive utility system upgrades. We are integral into transportation upgrades, anything from getting new bus lines or train routes going into communities, improving roadways or bicycle routes in a community, bringing in new community services, community buildings or childcare centers, community gardens. So all of these things really add to what we're bringing into a community. It's not just focused on housing. We, as Rick was explaining, we often look at remnant sites, but one of the challenges that is increasing to us as a developer is we really have to have an economies of scale as we're building. So we often focus on larger sites that can be developed, and those larger sites frequently come with challenges and increased costs. So small developments for us, whether it's a specific unit count that stays low or it's just a smaller, hard to service neighborhood, really come with some operational costs that are hard to support without a local subsidy for operations. So we typically are building on much larger sites that have a much higher unit density to meet a cash flow that we can support, so we can operate a building in the long term. So without those funding dollars and subsidies, it's really hard for us to economically support housing development in the long term. So as our costs are being driven up and the capital costs up front are being driven up, we need to really pool our resources and balance our resources for how we can operate that community in the long term. So there are thousands, I will just say across the state, there are thousands of units that are in developers' pipelines right now, same as Marcy Housing and all of our other developers that are really trying to build in our communities. And the reality is that we're not all going to be able to move forward with the same assumptions that we've been making on housing in the past several years. It's really challenging and competitive to get those capital funding dollars and the subsidy dollars from our local jurisdictions right now, because we're all trying to solve the same goal. How do we get more affordable housing? And so what we really have to try to do is be innovative in our solutions and try to find new financing that can target housing to meet the state goals with subsidies, tax credits and bonds and local things, and other local funds, but how can we really leverage those into doing what we need in the long run to create more affordable housing? And as we were kind of talking about, it doesn't help that we have high construction costs and inflation and rising interest rates that really all add to the cost of building development. I think we're going to talk about what can be done a little bit, but I think we as a developer are constantly trying to seek innovation in not only financing and policy, but construction, and how can we drive the cost of construction down and be more economical and streamline what we do on a daily basis. Okay, next slide, Elaine.
Oh, did it not go through? Uh-oh.
Nope.
Nope. What are you
This is
saying?
it. Wait a moment.
Went too far, I think.
Too far. Hang on a second. Where do we go?
There you go.
This way.
There, thank you.
Is this it?
We did that one.
We did?
We did that one.
What are
There you go, right there, Elaine.
We did that
okay,
one.
great. And sorry, Kelly.
Okay,
the
no, it's okay, no problem.
quick time check.
Here we
We got maybe about 3 minutes left. I would love to get to Q&A. Go ahead.
Okay, so the last one I just want to discuss quickly is developers want to maximize profit in their short-term gains. So we as a developer, we own the building in the long term, and we operate these buildings and provide real property management and services to our tenants. So what we collect these rents and those services and those operations go all back to us being able to afford to operate the building. We not only get local subsidies and state dollars, but we take out large mortgages on these projects that require heavy rent burden, heavy debt burden on the properties. And so in order to do that, we have to be susceptible to a cash flow that most of our budget goes back into the development to pay off our debt for the project. So if there's any remaining proceeds after we pay off our debt and our operation costs, that typically goes back to the property or to one of the funders that we're providing. Elaine, I know we're set for time, so if you want to jump ahead, I think we can maybe go to Q&A. Oh, okay. No, go ahead.
Well, no, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
I'm sorry, I skipped the slide. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I think the last thing I just want to discuss is that, we're increasingly building for sustainable environments. We're trying to reach codes and all of these things as we are upping what we are on the buildings. All of those costs for these complicated systems trickle down to the cost of the development and how we maintain the property. So it's everything from increasing wages to hiring staff and training these to maintain these new systems so that we can maintain EV chargers and PV panels and water pump systems and all of these highly technical things. All of that trickles down into the cost of being able to operate this in the long run. So the 3 points, and maybe this will hit some of your questions, Elaine, is what can we do? So I think our main focus is how do we reduce costs to incentivize additional construction in your community, continue to increase innovation and financing, policy and construction, and also promote policy that reduce the burdens on the cost of developments. I'll hand it over to you, Elaine. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all, and thank you guys for your presentations and your excellent explanations. Sorry to cut it a little bit short. I recognize we've only got about 15 minutes left, and there's a number of really good questions that have been trickling through. So we wanted to get through to a couple of them as quickly as possible. I might just jump into the audience questions, and I think the first one that came through was, are there any laws that stipulate that nonprofit contractors be approached first when public lands are being used? And I don't know if anybody has an answer to that one. Are there laws which stipulate that nonprofit contractors be approached first when public lands are being used?
Not that I'm aware of, but we'll take a look, and if not, we'll take a look at the idea. It's definitely worth considering. I don't know if Rick or Kelly might have a better sense of things.
I'd say I know some nonprofit developers that have some construction wings, but I haven't actually heard of a general contractor who was actually a nonprofit.
I think the question might be in reference to the Surplus Land Act.
That was what I was originally thinking that it was about. And there are rules around the Surplus Land Act requiring cities or government agencies that own land to dispose of it and give priority to nonprofits for housing and other aspects.
Great, thank you. I think Assemblymember Berman, this one might be for you. In your reference to impact fees, is that for commercial development or just impact fees on housing? Because this question, I was wondering if many communities ban impact fees on housing, but impact fees on commercial office space, which adds to the jobs to home ratio, are one of the few ways that communities, I guess, that lacks other tax sources like business taxes to help fund affordable housing.
Yeah, just on housing, and in particular, just on the density bonus units of housing projects. So that was what that kind of myth and suggested solution to would apply to.
Great, thank you. Question number 3, is there a way to get contractors to support building transportation corridors as an alternative to parking? And I don't know, this is just for contractors only.
Yeah. So let me, since I brought up the general contractors, and I want to say I'm a big supporter of them. I was just pointing out that there is added cost when you have prevailing wage contracts relative to not. And there are many good contractors that, we all want to see good paying wages. And what we're finding right now, and what I'm hearing from my contractor friends, is that costs are going up and they can't find enough people to do the work. So they need more people to get those good paying jobs. It will still, if there were enough contractors out there and enough subcontractors out there to do the work, and it would be a little more competitive, and there would be a cost reduction because of that competition, not because we're going to pay people less money. But a lot of the question is a comparison between market rate developers and affordable housing developers. They are required to pay prevailing wage and others are not. And so you can have lower cost construction for market rate development that isn't required by funding sources or other reasons for having a prevailing wage. But cities are really focused on their commercial corridors for higher density development and their transit corridors. And along the El Camino Real, except for a few communities up and down the El Camino, most have upzoned property along the transit corridor, and many of those properties are being transformed into affordable housing and mixed-use developments. So I think that they've made a great effort, and I still believe that we're going to realize the Grand Boulevard initiative in the future. It's just going to be piecemeal along the way rather than one swoop. And there's only 1 or 2 communities that have not moved forward with that, those set of policies up and down the corridor.
Who shall remain unnamed. Thank you. For anybody else want to chime in on the idea of transportation corridors as an alternative to parking? Okay. 4th question, are there any policies that cities can implement to address the inflation of cost of materials, or is the only way to address inflation through state or federal intervention? Really interesting question, very timely.
I'll just jump in quickly and say the issue of inflation is one really of time. We never in 33 years have I actually seen the cost of construction really substantively go down. It has gone up tremendously in the last 10 years. But what the biggest problem is for our development teams is that you start a project, and if you think you're going to get it done in 5 years, you can anticipate how much escalation there's going to be. But if it takes 8 years, that could be a 30% increase in cost. And it's hard to be putting all of the financial pieces together all the way along the line. So time is truly money. And so the quicker that things can get approved and processed, everybody's having to run very fast to try to get to the end and to try to minimize the cost escalation.
I can definitely support all of that. Thank you, Rick. And I would even say, you were using an increment of 5% increase per year, and we're even seeing that as, we're estimating our projects at about 10% increase per year right now, just with the inflation and rising interest costs at the moment. The other thing I would say is really just having an opportunity to expand those timelines of having to use funds. So we're often given state funds or local funds that are met with heavy regulations about the timing that we can use them. And if it's, as these costs are rising, it takes 5 or 6 or 8 state resources for us to be able to pool all of these funds together. And every single bucket of funds comes with their different regulations, their different oversight. And oftentimes, if we don't have that last piece of the puzzle, we might have to give a fund back because we can't use it in time to be able to finish our development because it's taking 8 years to build because we can't get that last piece of the puzzle. So more flexibility from these local and state sources so that we can use them together is really how one way that we can really leverage all these financing, options.
And I mean, on that point, totally agree, Kelly. And one of the things, I know we ran out of time for the planned questions, but Elaine had asked us to think of some questions. And one was, if we could wave a magic wand, what would it be? And the thing I was going to suggest was to create a one-stop shop to award all the different state resources for affordable rental housing, because of Kelly's point that there's 4 or 5 different, state agencies that award these fees. They all have different reporting requirements. They all have different timing requirements. I mean, it doesn't make sense from efficiency standpoint. If we're trying to make it as easy as possible for folks to build affordable housing, our processes sure do accomplish the opposite. So I think that's something that the state really needs to spend more time looking at.
Thank you. And that actually was going to dovetail with another question that just came up, that, time seems to be one of the biggest cost factors, whether it's local opposition or winning hearts and minds. So is there any ideas on how to deal with that?
I mean, one of the things that the state's trying to do is create more certainty, create more kind of ministerial approvals, create a little more certainty in the process for folks. Those are typically a lot of bills that also get a lot of opposition because, for various reasons from local governments or various stakeholders. But, what Rick and Kelly were talking about in terms of the increased cost with a couple extra years is real. And it takes so long for these projects to get approved and built. And so, if projects meet certain criteria, prevailing wage, healthcare for workers, infill development, all sorts of other things, then they should have a more certain path to getting it accomplished. And I think that's something it's kind of like a bill that I'm supporting this year, AB 2011, by my colleague Assemblymember Buffy Wicks. And I'm a co-author. It would establish the Affordable Housing and High Road Jobs Act of 2022 to create a ministerial streamlined approval process for 100% affordable housing in commercially zoned areas and for mixed income housing along commercial corridors. And so that's kind of trying to accomplish that. It says, if your project meets certain criteria, then, let's make it easier for you to get approved and built.
And I want to mention that, in almost every instance, the nonprofit that we're working with that is doing an SB 35 project, that they have rarely ever taken the attitude of, oh, well, we can just do whatever we want. They always, because it's part of their DNA, they almost always work with the city still and still have community meetings and still sit down with the neighbors and still try to work out issues with them, because they know they're going to be their neighbors for the next 50 years. They're going to be part of that community. So they don't take a shove it down your throat attitude. They take an attitude of, we're part of the community too, and we're going to listen, and we're going to try to do a great project that you all are going to be proud of at the end. And I have to say that I am more optimistic about affordable housing projects being approved today than ever in 35 years of doing this. It's so much better than it was 10 years ago. And I have to compliment our clients for holding with that and staying. But also, I got to say thank you to all of you out there who are really supportive of affordable housing and now show up at council meetings and board meetings and planning commission hearings and line up and say, we want this because this is something our community needs, and it truly is a community benefit. And that is more power that you can't voice, and we just need more of that.
I just want to quickly plus one what Rick just said. And, and Elaine knows this because she and I worked on this together in Palo Alto a decade ago, in creating Palo Alto Forward that Elaine led for so many years, is, citizens showing up, constituent, members of a community showing up and speaking in favor of these projects, whether it's affordable housing or market rate housing, is remarkably powerful, to provide a little bit of a counter narrative that often exists at a lot of local government meetings. So, if 5 people show up to speak in favor of something, that gives political cover to the local elected officials who might want to do what they feel like is the right thing, but they're afraid to do what they feel is the right thing. I'll tell you, I hear it all the time from my local elected officials. Thank you for voting on that housing bill. Publicly, I'm going to smash you because it's because my constituents are yelling at me about it. But I'm really glad you did that, because I know that it's necessary. I know my community needs to build more housing. But the more people that show up at those city council meetings to support it, give those local elected officials the support and the cover that they need to do what they know is right. And that's build more housing in our communities.
Great, thanks. And I know we're running a little bit out of time, so we can't get to every single question. But I do kind of want to just let you all kind of, actually, Mark, you alluded to the one of the questions that I was going to ask before we got into the audience members. But if you guys had a magic wand, what's the one thing that you would want to see? And maybe you can have another one, Mark. What's the one thing you would want to see to kind of help lower the costs of affordable housing here?
I mean, I think I already covered 2. One is creating a one-stop shop for our affordable housing developers for the different state resources that are available, and the others, bills like AB 2011. And it's a contentious bill. Negotiations are ongoing with different stakeholders to try to alleviate folks' concerns. But the concept is right, which is that if a developer wants to do the right thing, build a project under certain criteria that kind of fit our values, then let's make it as easy as possible for them to get some certainty in that timeline and in that process for building it. And I think those are 2 important things to get more affordable housing built.
Great. Kelly, and then I'll let Rick close out. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just touch on one thing that I don't think we discussed much or a little bit, but is really promoting policy that can help support your local community in other ways, just other than affordable housing. And that comes in supporting your local small businesses and retailers, supporting after school programs and services, and childcare, and infrastructure improvements, and transportation improvements in your community. Because those are all things that we as an affordable housing developer need to build a successful community, and are often put the burden on of bringing that into an area. But if that can be supported by the locality and the voters and everything that we can do as a community, we can focus on the housing and have all those other things supported by other players in the community. Again, thank you, Elaine.
That's a great point. Thank you, Kelly. Thanks for sharing that. Rick, go ahead. Close
and
this
I'll
out.
just say that what I've heard from most of the affordable housing developers is that the precious resource that they have the most challenging time getting is land. And so every community that has a piece of property that is laying fallow or is just a parking lot, if you have a site that you own as a city or government organization that is not being utilized, provide it to the affordable housing community to provide quality housing in your community. And that single piece is the thing that most often gets developments moving forward. And it's a precious commodity, especially in the South Bay where land is so valuable. And then for the community to support the affordable housing that is being proposed, knowing that you're going to get a high quality development that's going to be well managed with great services to support the residents and a quality design, is really supporting all of the different people that create affordable housing is really something that is a true asset for your community, and they will do good by you as well.
Thank you all. And I just wanted to thank everybody for taking part. I'm sorry we didn't get to every single audience question, but we'll try to send those out and maybe continue the dialogue offline, and we'll send out the materials as well. But this whole session was recorded. You can find it later on hlcsmc.org. And thank you to our panelists for joining us and for the great discussion. Really appreciate your time, and to all the audience members for taking the hour and thank you, HLC.
Thank you so much for having us do this, Elaine. It was really fun and you did a great job.
And we busted some myths, hopefully.
There you go. Busted.
Busted. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.